All right, let's do it. Thank you so much for joining. She is a special project consultant at Just Food, and she's also a writer, speaker, educator. And I am so excited to be chatting with you, Kiana.
Oh, goodness. Thank you, Yuko, for having me. I'm so excited to be here and talk to you.
Oh my, yay! Okay, the first question that we met within the Prime Produce community, but my first interaction with you was before I knew you're in food justice work or any of this epic work. That was sustainability event that you were a model.
Oh, yeah.
so, so I think that's one of the questions. But how do you describe yourself as a human being, and what is the one fun fact that people don't really know about you?
Ah, yes. Well, I've been going through some evolutions or transitions in work, but I would say in my personal life, I kind of see myself as a change maker, maybe a change agent, if you will. I feel like I'm somebody who connects the dots, and there's probably like a better word for that I just haven't figured out. But I feel like there's so many different things happening that I just want to help folks connect and like be able to be their truest selves. That's the creative juice that I have, or like my strength is giving truth to power as much as possible and using myself as like a model or an example, and then that helps like create space for other folks to find themselves. And I try to do that with work or just in personality or in time, because I just feel like, I don't know, there's a lot of folks that don't feel as connected to their voice, and I think we miss out in the world without the true voice and people speaking up for themselves.
That's so good. You know, a lot of people are missing out their true voice. That is so true.
Yeah. And then I guess one thing about me that some folks may not know is I actually was born in Richmond, Virginia. I just kind of imagine myself as just being here from the Bronx, but I don't claim being born from the Bronx. Yeah, I think some folks are surprised that I was actually born in Richmond, Virginia. My parents met when my mom was at the college I ended up going to, and they met on an end of a date. She was off a date, he was off a date, and they ended up meeting in the same like lobby together.
That's really cute. Yeah, I would have guessed that you are from New York.
See, I'm glad I picked that one. It's a good one. Yeah, no
That's a really
accent
good
from anywhere.
one. I love it. All right, so let's jump right in. Food justice. I love the idea of using food as a vehicle, the community garden as a vehicle. And then when I first learned about the idea and concept of the food justice, it mesmerized me. Like, wow, I didn't know such thing existed. It really is exciting. And food is universal. Food is
Yes.
something we all love. Food is something we come together, enjoy together. It creates so much connection in all of us. What was your inspiration and what was your journey with food like up until this point?
Yeah, I would say one of my earliest food memories is being in Richmond and being with my great grandmother and spending time with her in like the early morning out in the country, and being able to, have like a garden right there that used to be a farm. And, now it was like a family garden, and being able to pluck tomatoes, straight from the vine, and seeing her make biscuits from scratch. Like I was an infant, like very a toddler at most, and those are the memories I still hold. And I never thought about it, but it really started to come up for me as I started to end up in the work of food. It was definitely not when I was in college what I thought I was going to do. I actually thought I was going to work in the Gap, and be a professional manager. Go figure. I different things. But what really kind of spoke to me about food justice is I've always volunteered, and I had moved to Harlem, and I had volunteered with a group called Harlem for Food. And before they had switched back to being policy focused and like campaigning for Obama, they connected me to an organization called Just Food. And Just Food was offering a community advocacy training. So you might hear where this is going. But it was the first time that I too was blown away by the connection between community advocacy and connection to food, and learning like this, there's justice in it, or how do we use food as a tool to bring communities together, but also to advocate for the food that we want in our communities or in our larger landscape. And that's where I learned about policy. And I went back and I was just so jazzed. And I said, the group that I was with after the training, they had switched their focus. And I was like, I don't have anything else to do, but I want to stay in this space. I think there's something here for me. And I kind of picked policy because at the time I just didn't really feel like I saw a lot of folks of color, to be honest, there. And food really kind of became a connector between finding what I knew was like my lived experience, being a single Black woman and being a mother. And I learned for my son, and that kind of opened the door to me like, what do I see in my neighborhood? What's missing? And just connecting what is environmental inequity, or racism and injustice, like connecting it to not just how I live and work or see what I see in my son's school or what I'm fighting for in life, but that food actually, there's a system behind that too, and there's a way that folks can have community power and change on the individual level, community level, and systemic level. And I got that from the training, and it really kind of inspired me to kind of challenge myself to learn something. Like, I'm not a policy wonk. I never claim to be. I will never become one. But I thought that if there was a way beyond voting that it had so much power, and I learned that in like the Farm Bill and other policies, like how do we get community folks involved so they have a say in that? That became like the vehicle for me, as opposed to say growing speaks to other folks. It just felt like that was my challenge, to kind of meet myself in that middle and try to leverage some of my strengths around community or connecting the dots and talking to folks. And one thing led to another, like it genuinely started as taking that training and taking some more trainings around facilitation and popular education and justice and being community engagement, and then being able to have opportunities to speak about my personal experience in food, and realizing I wanted to have more of an impact. The more I did it, the more the impact I wanted to have a part in and I wanted to see. And then it started to become clearer to me, like I felt like I needed to do this as a job or a living, because I knew there would be metrics and I would have to report on it. And I just wanted to start seeing that impact. Now, years in between being just an advocate and a volunteer, working my way up in that organization and in other jobs too, and just seeing what empowerment can be and the inequities and trying to challenge it and using food as a driver, I did eventually get to become like the executive director of Just Foods. This being my job helps me um, connect to food justice, and it connects to other people, but it doesn't have to be your paying job to have a change or be a change maker either. And I realize that it's equally as important to share that with folks too.
I love that. It doesn't have to be pain to make a changes. And especially with food, I can see there's so much more joy, so much laughter, right? There is
Yes.
such a special bond that you get to create. And I want to ask a question about that. What do you think is the biggest benefit of using food as a vehicle in this work?
I think food is our common ground. Food is like water. It's the thing that we all need. It's the thing that speaks to us and resonates with us. It keeps us alive. So between food, air, and water, like I think that becomes the piece where we all can meet, break bread, build common ground, and also find it as a point of revolution too. It's a place that food can bring us together, but food can also has this power to bring folks together to affect change that they want. It's revolutionary. Food is very revolutionary. Food can be very political, extractive ways, as we see in like corporate system and big ag and government. But it can also be very regenerative in terms of growing, in terms of how we give back to the soil, how we share with people, how we build solidarity amongst each other, and we can use it as a collective powering tool. So it doesn't just fuel us as in our bodies, and that's important, but it fuels our economies or how we can share with each other. It fuels production, it fuels enterprise, it fuels innovation. And I feel like over my time in working in food, it became less about just food access and, oh, everyone deserves healthy food. That's still a core. But then I learned about food sovereignty, and it was like, oh, it's the right. Food really makes it clear how much our rights are connected and how we are connected to each other, and it makes it easier to see where the inequities lie and where the push and change has to happen.
It's such a beautiful experience, and food is our common language, as we've been saying. What has been the biggest shift
Uh,
in regards to your relationship with food?
oh yeah, I would say personally for me, it has been that piece around food being revolutionary. When I first started, I was one of the few folks of color I saw around the table, even at Just Food and doing work. Not really seeing a lot of folks in leadership. And the more I started to really understand the history of policy, I realized how historic and systemic, inequity has been. And it really kind of opened the door to understanding the systems that we are living in that we almost don't always wonder about. We don't always wonder about how food gets to our table or how food gets to our market. We don't always wonder, when we're being served in a restaurant, what is the experience of that person? And what's the journey of each ingredient on this plate, or what does it take to even get it to a plate that you can afford? And I think over time it became less about just food is fun, because there is something fun about it, but it was like, wait, there is survival and thriving connected to this, and food is like currency, and there's a value to it. And so it really kind of helped me see like different paradigms that maybe I had walked into in the food movement, because they have changed over time in this space, and really seeing like there's a joy to be had around food, but at the same time it could be a tool for revolution and a tool to engage folks that maybe don't see it as a revolution. And that to me has been like the biggest change, is the power of food and the power that food can bring us all in order to have the change that we want, not just on our plate, but in our work, in labor, in capitalist system, in the policy. And it can go beyond just what's in your bag, but also who are you breaking bread with, and who is getting it to you. And it just makes it just the easiest piece to kind of explain very complex things. So I would say for me, the sovereignty and building that power, and disseminating power. So how do we build power together? But then how do we share that power so it doesn't fall into the same microcosm of oppression? And do we use food to break that and challenge ourselves each time? And I feel like that is probably the biggest difference. And if you ask somebody who like maybe met me early on, where it's just like farm bill is bad, but we can apply for this grant, and now I'm like, this is how you can use food to like, feed your community, build job creation, and do it well. Like there's a connection between social good and justice, and food can be that. It doesn't always have to look in the dominant culture or capitalist way. And same for cultural relevancy. I think that's been a big part for me too. And that has come a lot from learning from not just elders, but youth in this work, and seeing that, again, like food isn't just what we put in our bodies, but it fuels so many other stories and connections. And the cultural relevancy of vegetables or meat or produce, or how do you put them together, and how you build a recipe, how you change that, really continues to grow for me, even though I'm ironically not a grower.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Before we had this recording, I had a conversation, and what really fascinating me was it says in your bio that you have a business mindset with a grassroots approach. I love that. It's so powerful. And now that you mentioned the social good and the change doesn't have to be pain or it has to be a struggle, and especially right now, we're recording this June of 2020, where civil rights movement, Black Lives Matter, and
Yes.
on top of the pandemic is happening. You've mentioned already there are few the women of color when you started doing this work, and as a woman of color in this specific time, we see that there are so much more to offer. Like, what possibilities do you see?
I'll be honest, I fluctuate between being inspired and then and reminding myself that I may not see the change that we all deserve in my lifetime or in our lifetime, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't fight and work towards that. So holding both, like how do you stay inspired and do the work that needs to be done? And I think right now this is a really important window, and I feel really honored to be a part of an active movement and have training and a skill set that I can really bring and share with organizations, businesses, for profit, nonprofit, community, all these different engagements and points, and be a part of a larger movement. Like it's not just one person that leads us, it's really being a part of a leaderful movement, and have had some time and skill set to grow into that to really be able to share that, I hope, as best as possible. So I say this is a time for us to really make the deep strategic pivots that are needed to really like shift the needle so much farther, even if it means it's not completely off. So it's like if this is a rock, how deep are we making that incision right now will dictate the next step for the people behind us, the women behind us, the children behind us, the folks behind us. And so I really get inspired. I just got off a call with this. I'm in the HEAL School for Political Leadership, and we have like different teams and groups. And there's a group from the Navajo Nation, and Stephanie and Dana, like I get and Gloria and Roberto, I get always inspired by them when just how we can make this time a time to truly connect to our history, our culture, our storytelling, our resilient practices, whether they're around growing, whether they're around thriving through struggle, and building together to really help us inform how do we move this forward and how do we keep moving forward together. Innovation doesn't always have to sound new and tech, and at the same time, you shouldn't feel encumbered by the past, but are we really learning from our resilient histories, in particular, women of color, Black women of color, Asian women of color, Indigenous women of colors, who were warriors and mothers and visionaries? Like, are we able to really take those practices and inform what is needed to take shape now? And are we ready to be as bold as they were in the face of what seems like unending struggle? And I feel like this is the time that we should really not just look to that and build on that, but we also should feel our voices collectively and pushing back on what feels performative and what is just activism for the sake of saying like I'm game for it. Like, are we really challenging ourselves? Are we challenging our elders, our leaders? Are we challenging the systems that are still in charge of our food system, our economic system? Are we truly pushing back on what is feeling performative? And are we really seeing the changes that we want to see? And are we connecting with not just our inner power, but power of folks that, organize or been strategizing around all the intersections around inequity? Are we showing up for that work and not understanding it, but then also understanding how do we bring our strength to this leaderful movement? And I feel like this is the time that we can do that. Change happens every day and change is iterative. But I think because there has been this ongoing work, we kind of hit this like window that we can actually have some deeper change and opportunity. Sometimes get a little concerned if it's getting squelched or distracted. And this is actually time that we can make those like changes real, and they will have the impact that we want to see longer. So again, even if it doesn't happen in our lifetime, it is that much further for the folks behind us. of, the back and the shoulders of our ancestors, and we are living ancestors. So if we see it that way, maybe it feels a little bit comforting in what is such struggle to tap into our power to bring something forward for someone else.
Thinking about ancestor, and we are the ancestor for the future generation. Everything is for the next generation.
Yes.
That is so beautiful. And you recently changed your position at Just Food from executive director to digital project consultant. And I
Yes.
love how you phrased it. You want to model the leaders that you want to grow.
Yeah. Last year we created this youth empowerment pipeline and model with two young leaders, proven leaders of color and of space, of youth driven work in the food justice system. We kind of built a project together to try to figure out how to determine or how to foster youth led or youth powered work, not just in the service situation where it's like, oh, here's a program and you join it for a little bit of time, but how much power could there be in terms of leadership of curriculum development and connection. And we learned a lot from it. And I think it also opened the door to me to see there's so much information that so many active youth and young adults have. And there's probably even more that don't even know or have connections to ways to engage their voice. And I think maybe what has been happening in the last couple of weeks has opened it up to some folks. But what also was surprising to me was in order to connect or engage or to foster that leadership in emerging leaders, there is a need to kind of create space where they do get to be, you're disseminating power a little bit. But we also realize like there's an intergenerational component that is needed. So you're not leaving them out to dry. Sometimes we go from extremes, especially in nonprofit work, where it's like it's one or the other, 100% or none. And what we realize is actually to move this forward, it's a little bit of both. And there's a little bit of trial and error in the sense of emerging leaders doesn't speak to just emerging as age, but it can also speak to emerging as how much connection do I have to power and how do I step into that? And power meaning decision making, in terms of like a nonprofit structure. How do I bring in other folks? How do I and share the gift of learning or share the gift of activism with somebody else? And then the practical pieces of it, like how do I fundraise for that idea and how do I get that concept going and how does this fit in with other work? And what we realized is if not if we do not have like a collective leadership, we're actually not supporting true emerging leaders of any kind, because in particular to like youth, then you're just leaving them with these vacuums of power where you're saying here's a table or here's like some a director or manager position, but where's the lessons learned that you get to learn and learn well and safely and constructively? So I say that to say what I'm seeing now is like what's needed is giving space, again, stepping up and stepping back. So like giving space to youth when they have strong ideas and finding ways to leverage resources around that so they can grow and experience that, but at the same time be ready to be there with knowledge and share and learn from them as they're learning. But also, if the learning's not always moving forward, if you have to take a step back or you learn something, are we creating spaces in particular for folks of color that is okay? It doesn't feel punitive, it doesn't feel extractive, and it doesn't feel like, well, then it all gets taken away. No, there's a place of learning here for all of us and both of us. And if we do that in a generationally, if we do that with a mix of power, if we do that in a mix of experience, then it opens a more collective and a more dynamic opportunity for folks to be able to lead with intention. That's kind of what I see now is knowing when to take this two steps up, the one step back, and then sometimes take two steps to the side. And sometimes that means stepping out because maybe it's time for that to grow in a different way. I struggle to see a lot of organizations, whether it's for profit or nonprofit spaces, that truly create constructive, dynamic workplaces for folks of color, from leadership down to staff. And something that I've been really encouraged and proud by is it's not easy. I don't want to make it sound like this is like an easy road or street, but trying to create a space of innovation and learning and mistakes and failures, because that's where the pivots and successes come from for folks, in particular folks of color, in particular folks that are usually not given decision making power, whether because they're youth, whether because they're not seen as having like the right expertise, and seeing how folks really respond to that, and trying to create a space where, as a leader of my own, I know how to show up in that work too, whether that is to support and bring funding in so we have more opportunities for that, or how to be constructive if something needs to pivot, and how to like build strategic pivots together that again don't feel punitive but really are places to grow. And I just don't feel like we see a lot of that for folks of color in any kind of work sector. And I'm really proud that we were able to do that with a tight budget and a tight space, but folks felt and resources are so limited because folks are not really familiar or comfortable um, funding things with, say, a black woman on the front, in conjunction with other folks of color. And I think we need more of that, and we need to push for that. And I think we need to show like our proofs of concepts are the facts that we're here. And it's not just in the programs that we build, or just the deliverables, but it's also creating the workplaces that all these racial equity statements are talking about. Like, you have to do it. And that's where the real work comes in, is doing it in the space that you have with the resources that you have in your leadership on down. And what are the changes that you're making in your own systems? Because if you got it there, then you would understand how to show up for it outside in the world, in your personal space, in your professional space, and how to leverage your power with other folks in inequity. If you can't address it in your own work, there's no way you're going to really understand it beyond the theory outside. Like, you got to be doing it. You can't just be talking about it and thinking about it.
Exactly. We all need people who are doing things. That's something that I always think about. Like right now, because we're in that height and like a heat of like everybody's all about the change, seeing in the long term, the vision, the collective changes. How do we make that? Understand where we're coming from, understand our ancestry and where we are heading. And people of color and women have such a strength in ourselves,
Hmm.
right? Because we've been pressed so much, and it is our time to speak out loud and take the leadership.
Something that we did at the conference in 2018 is like persist and resist. And it always reminds me of my friend and a comrade, Aki Baker at Minka Brooklyn, is something that also has come in this work, is how do we heal ourselves, and how do we support each other and keep our work regenerative? So like, how do we continue to persist and push and challenge and break those walls, but at the same time, are we supporting each other, and are we taking the practice that it needs to heal in order to stay in this work longer? When we talk about long term and we talk about solidarity or sustainability, the goal is to stay in this for the long haul, because this is long haul work. Passion can only get you so far, or energy will only get you so far. And if there's not a place of restoration, if there's not a place of reflection in the midst of action, then you will burn out so fast. And even somebody like me, I always fancy myself high functioning, and I found myself burning out. It took me, maybe longer than other folks, but I realized I wasn't able to be true to myself or true to the impact and the space that I wanted to be, because I wasn't taking care of myself. And I think it's both. It's hard. I just want to make sure we lifted that up too, is like the healing and the restoration and connecting to that, because that's the protest as well, and that's the fight as well, because they don't want us to take care of ourselves.
Mm, that is so true. And thank you for bringing up the conversations around the healing. Now that you are in a different state of
Yes.
your growth opportunity, you're probably going to be writing more, you're going to probably be speaking more. Like, where do you see yourself heading?
I do look forward to having more time to challenge myself in writing in different ways, and maybe articulating some of the skills or the lessons learned around the intersections around power and equity in class and race. Like, I do look forward to writing differently and a little bit more, whether in like blog form, or talking in podcasts, and talking in speaking engagements, writing in shorter form or more impactful form. So outside of like grants and stuff, I oh, that would be nice. Uh, I'm looking forward to having the capacity to connect more with, whether as individuals or in collective spaces like work environments or community environments again, where I can really be able to take off my ED hat and really push out or speak on the bold elements that folks seem to like. How to bring that social good. So when you said the grassroots approach with the business mind, I'm really excited to kind of figure out how to do that now in a space where there's this kind of opportunity, not just for myself as an individual, but like, can I work with people on an individual level or organizations or groups, where then we're creating that kind of space and infrastructure and support for other voices and leadership. And so if that looks like making connections in food models, food-based enterprise or projects, if that looks like, facilitating how an organization can be genuine and bringing equity in the workplace, or if it's just like talking community folks on how to challenge or advocate for the change that they want to see in their neighborhood, I'm looking forward to having like more time to really dig deep with different intersecting folks or groups, whether it's international or hyper local, in a way that I just couldn't as an ED. You kind of have to be available for all the things, and then you don't always get to dig as deep beyond what your organization priorities are. So now that I'm a little bit more free to do different projects, I can kind of be able to bring my full self to whatever project or opportunity it is, even if it's a podcast like yours.
Well, thank you for being here. So, for those folks who are listening this and want to get in touch with you for speaking opportunities or want to work with you, how would people get hold of you?
I'm working on my landing page as we speak, but so I hope to launch that fairly soon. But in the meantime, I would recommend folks reach out to me or check me out on my social media. On my Instagram is public, my Twitter is public. Handle is Ragamickie, Ragamickie. Feel free to like catch me there. My email, like, I'm still at Just Food, so sometimes people find me that way. So it's Qiana at justfood.org. So Qiana with a Q, no U. So Qiana at justfood.org. And I'll be sharing my landing page information once it's available.
That is so exciting. I can't wait for more people to know who you are, your work, beyond just food, and you as a whole individual. That's so exciting. So I have one last question for you.
Yes,
So,
sure.
like, you being the magical woman that you are, what is your one call to action for the world?
One call to action for the whole world. I would say the call to action is to push your boundaries, leverage your privilege, and we all have different forms of privilege, and really engage and learn and get active right now. Feel like you're doing work and you're engaging with new concepts and new action on the ground now, whether it's in food, politics, policy, class, baking, learning a new skill, bringing your skill set to folks in need. Push yourself in a way that if you were to look back by the end of the summer, that you would feel transformed.
Such a powerful call to action.
I know.
I
I
love
make very high call to actions.
it. We need
I
it. We
demand a
need it
lot
right
from
now.
us.
Hey, you hold us whole accountable as a collective. That's what we need right now.
And same, I would want folks to feel like they can hold me accountable gently. Let's all be gentle with each other. But feel free to hold me accountable and check in with me in 6 months. And I hope that I have also been able to, transform and shift the needle a little bit more.
All right. Thank you so much for being with me, Kiana. I so appreciate you.
Oh, thank you, Yuko. Thanks so much for this time and to share space with you. Your energy is so infectious and always so your gifts are so inspiring to me. So it's what I needed the last couple of days. So thank you so much.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.